Spike Lee is largely considered to be one of the most important filmmakers of the late 20th century. He has been heralded as a voice for the Black community within the filmmaking establishment. Lee has also been criticized for the often controversial content of his films. From his earliest film to his more recent works, Lee has included lesbians and other queer characters in his stories. Many have criticized him for the homophobic ways in which these characters are portrayed. In this video, I will examine necessary questions about these portrayals. How has Lee inserted lesbian characters into his films in ways that do not seek to truly portray the experience of queer women, but as sensationalist figures? How has he also broke new ground by depicting lesbians of color on screen? How are problematic depictions of lesbians an extension of misogyny and misogynoir in Lee's films? I will be focusing on Lee's first film, She's Gotta Have It, 1986, and She Hate Me, 2004, one of Lee's later works that was critically panned in part due to its portrayal of lesbian characters. I will compare these films to other pieces of media from around the time of their release that portray lesbians, The Color Purple and The L Word. She's Gotta Have It, Lee's first feature film, has been criticized for its treatment of its female protagonist and conservative messages about sex embedded in the narrative. The film centers on the sexual relationships of Nola Darling, a woman who is known for being a, quote, freak. We follow her over the course of several months as she attempts to choose between three different suitors: Mars, played by Lee himself, Greer, and Jamie. Also included in this love polygon is Opal Gilstrap, Lee's first lesbian character, as one of Nola Darling's admirers/friends. Opal is portrayed as predatory, continually asking Nola to try out homosexuality even when it is clearly making her uncomfortable, perpetuating stereotypes about queer people trying to convert straight people. In addition, Opal is shown to be as much of a user and manipulator of Nola as any of the men in the film. Bell Hooks stated about Opal in her famous essay, Whose Pussy Is This?, a critique of the gender politics in She's Gotta Have It, Opal does not represent an alternative to destructive heterosexual practice. The lesbian character is predatory, as much a dog as any of the men. Opal signifies a threat to the heteropatriarchal relationships of the film, and therefore a threat to Nola's dependency on Black masculinity. Lee introduces this threat, but characterizes Opal as an unrealistic option for Nola, and silly to think that she has a chance against any of the male suitors of the film. We see that Opal is a credible threat in the way that Jamie interacts with her early in the film. He is aggressive to Opal in a way that he is not to the males in the film. He is attempting to assert his dominance over Opal in order to neutralize the threat that she poses to the heteropatriarchal structure within the diegesis. Hooks compares the film to The Color Purple, stating that The Color Purple portrays lesbian relationships as a place of healing and erotic pleasure, while She's Gotta Have It discusses women having sex with women as a novelty of an experience that is being pushed on the straight main character of the film by an aggressive lesbian. The treatment of Opal as a character can be seen as an extension of the other ways in which misogyny/misogynoir manifests in the film. Nola Darling is continually robbed of her agency, culminating in the infamous rape scene near the end of the film. Opal could have been presented as an alternative to the heterosexual relationships that cause conflict for Nola, but is rather just another suitor trying to get her attention. While the representation of lesbians and women in general in this film is problematic, it is still a relatively early depiction of a lesbian of color in a film featuring an all-black cast. Lee was a filmmaker willing to broach the topic of female homosexuality, even if the character in question fed into many of the established stereotypes about lesbians perpetuated through film. We can trace these early roots of complexly problematic lesbian representation in Lee's first film to his later work, She Hate Me. While She's Gotta Have It is largely considered one of Lee's best films, She Hate Me is considered one of, if not the worst film Lee has made thus far. She Hate Me is about a man, Jack, who gets paid to have sex with lesbians in order to impregnate them with the help of his now lesbian ex-fiancée, Fatima. There are many other plot lines in the film that I'm not going to discuss here that include, but are not limited to, Jack whistleblowing about a fake AIDS vaccine his company is trying to sell, the lesbian daughter of a mafia boss leading to an investigation of Jack, and an over-the-top court drama at the close of the film.
As far as lesbian representation goes in the film, many found its portrayals offensive and two-dimensional. Owen Gleiberman of Entertainment Weekly said, quote, "She Hate Me manages to be at once racist, homophobic, utterly fake, and unbearably tedious," end quote. The film includes over-the-top sex scenes with all of the lesbians that Jack impregnates, showing all of them enjoying it to an extent, most screaming in ecstasy as a source of spectacle. This perpetuates the myth that all lesbians need to enjoy heterosexual sex is to find the right man. Here it is Jack, but he is symbolically a stand-in for the role that black men play in heteropatriarchy. The insertion of Jack into the lesbian reproductive process is also an extension of misogyny, in that it perpetuates the myth that women need a man to start a family. By incorporating Jack into Fatima and Alex's familial unit, as well as those of the other women he impregnates, it is made clear that Lee is unable to imagine a family structure without the presence of a man. Lee's vision of a queer family structure is still centered around a patriarchal figure, even as he portrays women in relationship with each other. For this film, Lee hired a lesbian writer, Tristan Taormino, to train the cast and crew of the film on lesbian culture. She justifies her work on the film and its representation of lesbians by saying, quote, "Lesbians are not minor characters in this film. They are an integral part of the story, just as we are an integral part of our society," end quote. I would argue that just because there are main lesbian characters in a story does not mean that those characters are a positive representation of the lesbian community. She also mentions that the actors of the film were committed to portraying their characters as complex and non-stereotypical. However, there's only so much an actor can do with a script that has problematic representation embedded in its structure. Another piece of media that represented lesbians that was released in the same year as She Hate Me was The L Word. The L Word was made by lesbians for a both gay and straight audience. It centers around the lives of a group of lesbians friends in Los Angeles and their relationships with each other. The L Word is a show that has also been criticized for its portrayal of lesbians as largely white, upper class, and femme. However, it is also a show about lesbians in relationship with each other with minimal interaction with men, unlike She Hate Me. It also depicts the ways in which lesbians create community through both romantic and platonic relationships that often overlap. These lesbians are also upper class. They can afford to pay Jack $10,000, which is a much larger sum than most artificial insemination options. And they are also mostly femme, with some notable exceptions. However, he makes a clear effort to portray a racially diverse group of women, mostly women of color. Lee also states about the film that the lesbians who were opposed to it were mostly white, while the lesbians who supported it were mostly women of color. While She Hate Me still clearly perpetuates many stereotypes about lesbians, Lee was able to create a film with 19 lesbian characters who are mostly women of color. The film is clearly a sex satire gone awry and shows its homophobic cards to the audience throughout. Overall, we can see Lee's portrayal of lesbians as an extension of his often misogynistic portrayal of women in his films and a rare example of a filmmaker depicting lesbians of color. Lee implies that what lesbians really need is a man, or they will pine after and attempt to steal straight women from men. Lee's politics in his film are often contradictory and controversial, and his stance on lesbians is no exception. He's willing to include them in his films, but at the cost of falling into negative stereotypes and positioning lesbians as a threat to his black male characters.